Bob Marley didn't just make music, he made a movement. Some artists finish their work and leave. He left and kept going. Matthew Perry made a generation laugh every week for a decade. The talent was obvious. What he carried behind it, less so. Amy Winehouse. 5 albums planned, 1 masterpiece delivered. The voice alone was enough to make her permanent. Lisa Marie Presley lived inside the longest shadow in pop history and carved out something that was entirely her own. Olivia Newton-John crossed genres, crossed decades, and never once lost the audience. Warmth and staying power in equal measure. Richard Roundtree walked onto screens in 1971 and changed what a leading man could look like. Everything that followed owed him something. There is a moment in every great actor's career when the audience stops watching a performance and starts believing they are watching a person. Robert De Niro has lived in that moment for more than 50 years, and he is still living in it now. He did not arrive on screen as a star. He arrived as a threat, a coiled, unpredictable, quietly volcanic presence that made other actors nervous and made audiences lean forward in their seats. The critics eventually found the language for it. The industry eventually handed him the trophies. But the people who felt it first were the ones sitting in darkened theaters in the early 1972, watching a young man from Little Italy make fiction feel uncomfortably real. To understand how Robert De Niro became Robert De Niro, you have to start with Stella Adler, because she is where the architecture begins. Adler, one of the most formidable acting teachers America has ever produced, trained De Niro in a tradition that insisted the actor's job was not imitation, but transformation. You do not copy life. You become a version of it that is more true than the original. De Niro absorbed that lesson so completely that it would define every major choice he made for the next 4 decades. He did not learn craft from Stella Adler. He learned a philosophy of disappearance. The person who first recognized what that philosophy could produce on screen was not a producer or a studio executive. It was a filmmaker from the same streets. Martin Scorsese met De Niro when they were both young men, circling the same ambition, and what followed was one of the most important creative partnerships in the history of American cinema. Their first collaboration was Mean Streets in 1973, a film that felt less like a movie and more like a document smuggled out of a neighborhood. De Niro played Johnny Boy, reckless, magnetic, self-destructive, and the performance had a quality that Scorsese would later describe as completely uncontrollable in the best possible way. Johnny Boy was not a character you analyzed. He was a character you ducked away from. 2 years later came The Godfather Part 2, and with it, a supporting actor Oscar for De Niro's portrayal of the young Vito Corleone. What makes that performance extraordinary is not just its technical achievement, delivering a full emotional arc in a second language, in Sicilian, but its audacity. Marlon Brando had already defined Vito Corleone for a generation. De Niro did not imitate him. He invented a younger version of the same man from the inside out, building the performance from stillness and economy in a way that made Brando's later choices feel like the logical outcome of De Niro's earlier ones. It is one of the only times in film history where a prequel performance has enriched and deepened the original rather than diminishing it. Scorsese brought him back for Taxi Driver in 1976, and this is where the partnership moved from remarkable to landmark. Travis Bickle, the insomniac, alienated Vietnam veteran driving through a city he believes is rotting, became one of the defining characters of 1970s American cinema, and arguably of American cinema full stop. De Niro prepared for the role by working actual night shifts as a cab driver in New York. He lost weight, shaved the mohawk himself, and inhabited a psychological state that his co-star Jodie Foster, then a teenager, later said was so complete it occasionally frightened her. The famous mirror scene, in which Travis Bickle rehearses confrontation alone in his apartment, was largely improvised. "You talking to me?" was not in the script. It emerged from the space Scorsese gave De Niro and from De Niro's willingness to go somewhere unplanned. That improvised moment became one of the most quoted lines in cinema history. Raging Bull, in 1980, is where De Niro's relationship with physical transformation became something the industry had genuinely never seen before. To play the middle-aged, bloated Jake LaMotta in the film's later sequences, De Niro gained approximately 60 pounds over the course of several months, pausing production so the weight gain could be achieved naturally. He had already trained seriously enough as a boxer to spar with LaMotta himself. The real Jake LaMotta later said De Niro could have been a professional contender. The weight gain that followed was the other half of the same commitment. Not prosthetics, not camera tricks, but the body itself as the instrument of the story. De Niro won his second Academy Award, this time for Best Actor. Scorsese has since said Raging Bull is the film he is most proud of. Their friendship, forged over a decade of shared risks, had produced something that belonged to neither of them alone. But De Niro was not only Scorsese's actor, he was also, during the same period, building a parallel body of work with other directors that demonstrated the range that could get lost when critics focused only on the Scorsese films. Michael Cimino cast him in The Deer Hunter in 1978, a film that won Best Picture, and in which De Niro played Michael Vronsky with a quiet, load-bearing dignity that anchored an ensemble including Meryl Streep and Christopher Walken. Elia Kazan, late in his career, recognized De Niro as a successor to the tradition of actors he had helped shape. Even Bernardo Bertolucci, working across language and culture, sought him out for 1900, recognizing something universally combustible in De Niro's presence. The 1980 seconds brought a different kind of challenge. De Niro had already proven he could transform. Now the question was whether he could command. Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America cast him as Noodles, a gangster whose story unfolds across decades, and De Niro delivered a performance of extraordinary temporal range, playing the same man at wildly different ages and emotional states with a coherence that the film's complex editing structure depended upon entirely. Brazil, with Terry Gilliam, gave him a cameo so strange and vivid that it lingered in the mind long after the film ended. And Cape Fear, in 1991, a second Scorsese collaboration from a different era, showed De Niro willing to go somewhere genuinely repellent, playing Max Cady as a creature of pure menace, without softening edges or asking for audience sympathy. Off-screen, De Niro's relationship with New York was not just residential, it was entrepreneurial and civic. In 1989, following the devastation of Tribeca caused by the departure of the film industry to other cities, De Niro co-founded the Tribeca Film Center with Jane Rosenthal. 2 years later, they launched what became the Tribeca Film Festival, a direct response to the September 11th attacks, designed to bring life and economic activity back to Lower Manhattan. The festival, which launched in 2002, has since grown into one of the most prominent film festivals in the world, amplifying independent voices and becoming a platform for stories that would otherwise struggle to find an audience. De Niro's relationship with his city was never passive nostalgia. It was active, structural, and lasting. The collaborators who orbited De Niro across the 1990s and 2000s tell a different part of the story, one about a performer willing to test himself in genres and registers he had never claimed as his own. When Barry Levinson cast him in Wag the Dog, opposite Dustin Hoffman, in 1997, De Niro played a political spin doctor with a comic precision that surprised critics who had only tracked his dramatic work. Meet the Parents in 2000 made him a genuine comedic star to a generation that had grown up after Taxi Driver, a generation that knew him through Ben Stiller's terrified face more than through Travis Bickle's mirror. The partnership with Stiller produced sequels, a franchise, and a new audience. And when David O. Russell cast him in Silver Linings Playbook in 2012, alongside Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence, De Niro delivered a performance as a Philadelphia Eagles fan and father navigating mental illness in his own family. A performance so specific, so stripped of movie star distance, that it earned him yet another Oscar nomination. Bradley Cooper has spoken directly about the experience of acting with De Niro as a kind of gravitational field. You had to raise your game just to stay in the same scene. The relationship with his family, both personal and professional, has shaped De Niro's public presence in ways he has navigated openly and on his own terms. He and actress Diane Abbott had a son. His relationship with Toukie Smith became public in the late 1982 and produced twin sons via surrogate. His marriage to actress Grace Hightower, with whom he has 2 children, became the subject of significant public attention when it ended. In 2023, De Niro revealed that he had welcomed a 7th child at the age of 79, a disclosure that briefly dominated headlines and that De Niro met with characteristic bluntness. He talked about it when asked, without apology, without performance. His relationship to fatherhood, across decades and changing circumstances, has been one of the most consistent personal themes in an otherwise fiercely private life. Martin Scorsese came back into focus in the 2010 seconds with a project that would anchor De Niro's return to the center of serious, critical conversation. The Irishman, released by Netflix in 2019, cast De Niro as Frank Sheeran, a Teamster official and alleged mob hitman, in a film that also reunited him with Al Pacino and Joe Pesci. The film used digital de-aging technology to allow De Niro, Pacino, and Pesci to play versions of themselves across 5 decades of story. The technology was imperfect. Critics debated it extensively. But what was not debatable was De Niro's performance in the film's final act, where Sheeran, old, alone, diminished, sits with what he has done and says almost nothing. The silence was devastating. Scorsese gave his oldest collaborator the hardest thing to play, a man at the end of his story, carrying weight that cannot be put down. De Niro played it without sentiment or self-pity, and it was as fine as anything he had ever done. Killers of the Flower Moon, in 2023, pulled Scorsese and De Niro back together again, this time with De Niro in a supporting role as William Hale, a cattle baron and architect of systematic murder in the Osage Nation. The film, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone, became a cultural event, a historical reckoning, and a critical triumph. De Niro's William Hale was terrifying precisely because he was so reasonable-seeming, a community pillar whose warmth was indistinguishable from predation. It was a reminder, if any were needed, that De Niro at 80 was still choosing complex, difficult, morally demanding material, still refusing the comfortable lane. The people who came after De Niro, the actors who grew up watching Raging Bull and Taxi Driver in film school or on videotape, have been direct about the debt. Leonardo DiCaprio has cited De Niro as a primary influence on his approach to physical and psychological transformation. Joaquin Phoenix, whose method intensity draws constant comparison to the older generation, has acknowledged De Niro as a benchmark. Even performers from entirely different traditions find themselves measured against the standard De Niro established. That preparation is not optional, that transformation is not vanity, that the body and voice and psychology of an actor are instruments to be used fully or not at all. His public presence has grown more vocal in recent years. De Niro has spoken candidly about politics, about the city he loves, about the responsibilities he believes public figures carry. He appeared outside the courthouse during a significant New York trial to speak to reporters directly, an act so unusual for someone of his stature that it generated days of commentary. Whatever one thinks of his political positions, the willingness to step forward, without a film to promote, without a publicist's careful framing, reflected something consistent about the man, a preference for directness over management. Robert De Niro is in his 80s, and he is still working, still choosing projects that challenge him. Still the name that other actors invoke when they are trying to explain what commitment actually looks like. The legends he runs alongside, many of them gone now, sealed into their final forms, became permanent because they gave everything they had to the work. De Niro is in a rare position. He gave everything, and he is still here to give more. His story is not finished. The ledger is still open. And in a business that celebrates the new and forgets the old with extraordinary speed, that is not a small thing. That is, in its own quiet way, everything.